Good day to you. Just last week, Star Wars, the film, opened up in the United States to the biggest gross receipts in the history of film, smashing through earlier film successes. Star Wars as a blockbuster, though, really can be traced back to the history of the development of film itself. So this is what we're talking about in today's instructional lecture. We're talking about the chapter on movies or film. And I want you to notice as we start to talk about developments as we go through radio and audio and film and then television, how quickly technologies of mass communication are developing. Keep in mind that from the Gutenberg printing press, back when we were discussing print media in the 1400s, it took decades and hundreds of years sometimes for the next major development to take place. Now look at the acceleration in the 1800s and the 1900s as we go through these next few chapters and see how quickly media are developing, and then think about that in terms of the day and age that we live in now and how quickly things are developing now with the latest releases of updates for Snapchat to the latest iPhone to Fitbits and all the other technologies that are propelling mass media at an accelerated pace in terms of its development than ever before. Anyway, to begin our entry point with movies really started in the late 1800s, but they didn't take off until the early 1900s. And the inventor behind the movie, who's been credited as creating the ability to distribute movies and produce movies, is Thomas Edison. And he invented the kinetoscope. The kinetoscope was kind of like a viewfinder. If you put on a kind of like binocular skirt over your eyes and then looked into the machine, that's Thomas Edison's kinetoscope. And it wasn't movies as we thought of today. It was a series of photographs taken with a person in a different posture. And so as you flip through those photographs, it appeared to create the illusion of movement. And therein is how we have the name movie. So Thomas Edison really created that illusion for us, and he's the first person to be talked about as an inventor of movies. Along come a couple French brothers, though, the Lumiere brothers, in the year 1895, and they improved upon Edison's invention with a cinematograph. I always have difficulty pronouncing this word, cinematograph. The cinematograph was an idea of a projector and also a camera, a video camera in one, or a film camera, I should say. So it could both record and it could project. And now it started to project movies not in like a single sitting where it's one person looking at a kinetoscope watching a single movie. Now we have the idea of a movie being projected in a booth onto not really what is considered today to be the big screen that we have today, but it was more for something. It was more film was projected in a setting that could be viewed by more than one person, and that was a breakthrough for film because it started to create the idea that film could be viewed in masses of people or groups of people. And by the way, at this time, film was not anything like we thought of today, like we think of as film today. Film in the cinematograph's time period and also the kinetoscope was about moving figures. There was no storyline. It was like a guy flexing his muscle or a woman riding a horse. There was no storyline. It really took Edwin Porter, who made the film The Great Train Robbery in 1903, to advance film from the point of view of telling a story. And his epic film, The Great Train Robbery, I hope some of you from this class choose to Google this stuff today, and you can actually find these films online. Look for The Great Train Robbery, and you'll see a black and white film. It's got outlaws, it's got good guys and bad guys, it's guys. And it revolves around a robbery on a train. There's a lot of drama. So you can start to see film in its inception there, getting some of the very basic tenets of how it's going to operate with a narrative structure in today's day and age. And in fact, the next person that we want to credit now in this tracing of the history of film is D.W. Griffith. D.W. Griffith produced the film Birth of a Nation. This film was a breakthrough film because it was the first feature-length film approximating 2 hours, which is basically what we consider to be the normal length for a film today, the feature film. D.W. Griffith's film was a very racist film. It portrayed African Americans as animals. It had the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, coming to the rescue of a white family of settlers that was being threatened by African Americans. And the film is still controversial today in terms of, did he mean to portray life as it really was, or was he really criticizing the prejudices in life? That's something that's still being debated today. D.W. Griffith, by the way, is the person who's responsible for elevating the importance of movie stars. In the past, movie stars were downplayed. They didn't even receive credits in films. The film was more about the film than it was about the movie star. But D.W. Griffith started paying actors and actresses more money, and he started to create films that would have marquee actors and actresses, and therefore started to create publicity that would elevate the importance and the status and the prestige of movie stars. So now the film industry is in full swing. It's starting to grow up, and most films are produced in New Jersey and New York City. But that all changed because a lot of the people who were involved in film didn't like the way that the studios in New Jersey and New York ran things. The studios would pick what films the actors and actresses had to do. The actors and actresses had no choice. Also, the studio system used something called block bookings. Block bookings was a kind of a way of blackmailing theaters. It was saying, okay, if you want to buy this film, then you also have to accept this other film. May not be a good film, but you have to show this film in your theater as well if you want this other film. That's what block bookings is all about. And so a lot of the people who were involved in film decided there's got to be a better way, and they looked elsewhere to produce films, and they ended up moving out to California and founding Hollywood, which was a place that offered itself many more advantages for producing of films than the East Coast. It had a landscape that was suited to mountains with snow, desert, suburbs, oceans. You could do year-round filming, and the space was expansive. So Hollywood presented a lot of advantages, and that's why we have the film industry settling out there in California. And in fact, a group formed itself around the idea of trying to wrestle control from the studios. This group was called the United Artists. It was formed by actors, and the idea was to produce independent films, not films that were done by the studios, but to take independent films and then to distribute them without having to be locked into what the studios wanted. One of the first films to come out of this new system of producing films was The Jazz Singer in 1927. It's what's referred to in the history of film as the first talkie film. That's right, films before that were mostly silent films with a soundtrack, but The Jazz Singer now suddenly comes along and has sound in it. In actual fact, it was not what we think of as sound today. There is sound, but it's not synchronized to the film like we consider. It's overlaid on top of the film. There's only 2 sections in the film where you have sound in it, but it was a big breakthrough because otherwise films were silent before, and sometimes even had a live piano player playing piano while a film was being shown back. The Jazz Singer changed all of that. In 1948, finally, the Department of Justice in the United States smashes open the studio system and opens it right up and makes it possible for independent film producers to produce films and distribute them in studios. And they also make the idea of block bookings illegal. So that changed the whole way that film is distributed. The studios no longer had a stranglehold on the enterprise of film because of this 1948 Department of Justice ruling. Also, though, in this time period, there was a bleak or a black mark on the history of film because, if you've read the book, you know about the blacklist. And the blacklist was developed by people who were elected to Congress. Among them, chiefly was Joseph McCarthy, a senator. And he developed this list of actors who were known to be or said to be communist sympathizers. In 1948, there was the big Cold War. It was after World War II, and there's a big stalemate between the United States and the Soviet Union, and a big scare in our country about the takeover of communism. And so McCarthy, along with others, collaborated to produce a bunch of actors lists who were not going to be hired because they were communist sympathizers. That's the blacklist. All right, now let's consider the effect of TV on movies, because when TV came out, again, it started to cannibalize the audience of movies, just like it had cannibalized the audience of radio, taken some of the audience away. People started to watch video or film at that time in the comfort of their own homes, and so that took away some of the movie attendance and the ticket sales in theaters. So film reacted. What could film do better than television could do? Well, one of the first things film producers started to do is produce what were thought of as larger-than-life movies. Movies that were bigger than life. It's not really representing life, it's bigger than life itself. So 3D movies is one example. Movies produced in third dimension, which didn't take off that much in the 1950s is when we're talking about, mostly sci-fi films with 3D. But here we have, again, today, 3D has become very popular. Star Wars, coming out last week, can be seen in 3D. Also, films took on plots that were of a very grand scale. The film Spartacus is talked about. If you watch Spartacus, it's just vast expanses of legions and legions of Roman soldiers. And the production cost to put that together, starring Kirk Douglas, Michael Douglas' dad, must have been astronomical with the amount of actors and the sets and the props and everything else it took to create this film. It was just bigger than life itself. Also, the movie industry reacted to television by actually borrowing a technique from television, the technique of coloring film. It's not easy to color film. It's a pretty complicated technical process. But film borrowed that. TV came out with color first, film borrowed it, and Wizard of the Oz is one of the first films to really develop a rich coloration to it. And if you look at Wizard of Oz, the colors are absolutely brilliant in almost every single scene. Also, movies adapted to TV by building, the movie industry, I should say, by building multiplex theaters. Theaters that would show more than one film, so you wouldn't have to only see the one film that's showing there. You could go to many different films and even see two films in a row if you want. Now let's move on to the movie business. In the movie business, we want to discuss the blockbuster era. The blockbuster era was started by the film Jaws in the 1970s, the film about the shark that was killing people. And still that film is responsible for a lot of people's fears of going in the water. It's amazing the lasting impact of that. The blockbuster film was a film that would shatter all records. It would come out during the summer months, and it was designed to get people in to see it in masses. And the way that this was done was by promoting the film outside of the theater. So Jaws was the first to be based on a novel, a book novel, and it was the first to use promotion on television promotion to let people know that Jaws was coming and to build up anticipation of this big film, just like we have trailers today doing the same kind of thing. Now let's talk about home video. Home video through the VCR in the 1970s changed filmmaking because it made it possible to view film in the home. It also changed the distribution of film because now film would come out in the theater and then be re-released afterwards. A period of time would pass, 6 months, a year, and then it could be shown in the home. Of course, today we have DVD recorders and streaming and TiVo and lots of other methods, but it was the VCR that broke the mold of film having to be seen in theaters. Now let's move on to digital production. Star Wars, the original Star Wars films, were seen as what really developed digital production. It's creating parts of the film using digital photography. It could be spaceships like were done in Star Wars. It can even be animated characters. Digital production has become a big and important part of producing films. Now we're moving on to movies and society. As is the case for other chapters, we want to consider whether films are creating problems for us or offering remedies for us as a society. And a lot of debate exists about whether films just mirror society or actually encourage things. One of the primary examples of how films are said to actually affect society directly was the Clark Gable film. He's the actor in the film. It Happened One Night. And in that film, he takes off his shirt and he has just his bare chest. And prior to that, men were very commonly wearing undershirts. And so when this happened, the sales of undershirts plummeted as men started to copy Clark Gable, a very handsome and virile man. And because of his role in that film, it's said to create a movement amongst Americans in terms of their behaviors. Also, films like pop music have been criticized for the moral decay of society. Look at the gun violence of today. You can look at the drug abuse. You can look at sexual promiscuity, if you consider those things to be evils. Certainly, film portrays them in very many storylines, and PG films included. You can find lots of films that have questionable morality in their characters. And that leads us now to the rating system. A rating system was developed for film because the rating system was, I wouldn't say it was foisted on the film industry, but it was about to be foisted on it by the federal government if the film industry didn't itself start to rate films to provide consumers with appropriate information to help them decide whether the film is appropriate for them content-wise. So the rating system is listed in the book. There's an interesting story behind particularly the X rating, which was developed separately by the pornographic industry as kind of a tongue-in-cheek borrowing of a brand that was never actually copyrighted by the Motion Picture Association, as was PG and R and all the other ratings. So the X it's not really official, but it's certainly used. That takes us now to what is the future of movies, and like most of the media in this class, it's difficult to project into the future, but we do know that a large part of filmmaking and film consumption in the future is going to reside in our own home theater systems. Many of you come from families with with big screens on your walls, but also we know that streaming will be a big part of films. Netflix originally was focused mostly on film, but now it's streaming so many television shows, it's almost as if there's an in-between space, in between film and TV, that we have not really come up with a name for yet, a way of talking about it. And in turn, Netflix is changing the way that TV is viewed. But that's a whole other subject for the chapter on TV. So I'm going to end it here. This will wrap up the chapter on movies. Have a great day.